A galaxy far, far away promises a brand new story with a major director promising a fresh start for Star Wars. Meanwhile, a Nigeria animation talent is seeking global recognition, and South Africa's biggest cinema chain faces severe shutdown. We are connecting the dots of the global film industry in flux. Welcome to the Film Mandate. My name is Papa Otu. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Film Mandate, where I bring to you movie news, reviews, and reactions, both from the African front and the international scene. And thanks for joining me for this episode. And in this episode, we'll be delving a little bit into the developing or the now shooting Star Wars, the Starfighter, which stars Ryan Gosling, and they are currently shooting in the UK, which started somewhere in August. And Shawn Levy was interviewed and he offered some insights as to what the direction of the story really is. So we'll be delving into that story as well. And also talking about production. There is a new animation talent who was interviewed on Rise TV in Nigeria, and this animation talent is Gabriel Ugbodaga. I hope I pronounced the name right. Pardon me if I didn't. But he, stressed on how Nigeria has quite an animation talent, but what we need now is training and exposure. And I felt that was in the right spirit of what he actually stressed on. And also, we'll be talking about Ster-Kinekor, South Africa's biggest cinema chain, which is facing severe shutdown with a number of its cinemas closing in some of the biggest or malls in South Africa. So these are actually the stories for today, and we'll be delving into it. So with the very first story, it's been quite a while since we've had a Star Wars movie actually being shown at the cinemas. What we've had over the years are a couple of Star Wars series on Disney Plus, and one way or the other, most have been quite divisive, and some have supported some of the stories vehemently. Others too have, not been quite indifferent as to how some of the stories have been portrayed, particularly with some knowing the law like the back of their hands. Well, a few of them have been quite successful, like the Andors, and and I think the Andors produced by Dave Filoni. But now, I mean, a couple of, let's say years back, somewhere in 2022, we heard that Shawn Levy is going to be directing Starfighter, Star Wars, the Starfighter. And well, it's already happening, as I'm sure you are already, in the known, because Star Wars, the Starfighter, has already been in production for quite some time now, since August. And Shawn Levy at an event was interviewed, and he shared his view as to what this particular production direction is. And the statement he did made was that it's neither a prequel, neither is it a sequel. It's a fresh story, it's a fresh start. And that has also actually been confirmed by, Lucasfilm CEO Kathleen Kennedy. And let's take a brief read at an article when Shawn Levy expressed his thoughts on what he's working on. So, Star Wars Starfighter director Shawn Levy clarifies movie is neither a sequel nor a prequel to anything, and this can be found in the comicbookmovie.com. So, this is what it says. Despite rumors to the contrary, Shawn Levy has confirmed that Star Wars Starfighter will be a fully standalone adventure and not a sequel nor a prequel to anything. There's been quite a few rumors relating to Shawn Levy's Star Wars Starfighter doing the rounds since Disney announced that cameras were rolling on the project earlier this year. with some claiming that the movie would directly connect to the sequel trilogy by laying some of the groundwork for Lucasfilm's future plans for Rey and the new Jedi Order. While Starfighter might well include some ties to the wider Star Wars universe, Levy has now clarified that his film will be a standalone story, and this is what he had to say. Well, for one thing, it is different in that it is an all new non-sequel, non-prequel adventure. It's new characters, it's a new timeline, it inherits legacy themes, but it's really trying to give Star Wars fans and just movie audiences something fresh, something new, and with a spirit of playing and big-hearted adventure with moments of real levity that, frankly, A New Hope had in a revolutionary way. The Deadpool and Wolverine director tells Collider. We are really trying to sort of take that tone as a North Star every day. My crew, my DP, Claudio, Miranda, Gosling is my kind of central collaborator in the lead role. It's certainly been a dream come true. My 10-year-old self is on set with me every day. In fact, he's going to catch a flight tonight to go back to the set and keep shooting on Monday. But it's a huge, invigorating opportunity because Lucasfilm had been so encouraging of me doing something new. There's no pressure to be derivative or limited by an obligation to what came before. There's just a love for what came before. And that is Shawn Levy expressing his thoughts on his films as so many people have speculated as to which direction the film would be going in. So, indeed, finally, this has been clarified and it gives us a clear view as to what the Starfighter film is going to be about. And that is indeed quite refreshing. And I think perhaps even more than ever, Star Wars as a franchise needs this because one way or the other it's been quite divisive, perhaps not as divisive as other franchises, but one way or the other, fans have not been quite satisfied as to the number of productions that has come out of this particular IP. And this film, just as Sean Levy has stated, it is not going to be necessarily tied to any film that has come before or anything of that nature. It's just a standalone film. The only thing that we know of is that this particular story will be happening about 9, 5, 6 years, depending on, I mean, into after the events of the rise of the Skywalker. So that is the only clear information we know. But I think it is good. One of the things that you can say of John Levy's films, regardless of the tone, is how joyful and light-hearted it feels when you watch it. If you watch any of his films from the Adam Project to the obviously the Deadpool and Wolverine starring Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman, and also something Robot, I think starred Hugh Jackman, you realize that he has some joy to the kind of films he does, and perhaps more than ever before, I think Star Wars particularly needs this kind of levity or fresh approach to their stories, and I think it is indeed in the right direction that they are pursuing this. So personally, I think it is good for Star Wars to be approaching or to be approached in this manner, and good for them that Kathleen Kennedy felt that she needed a Sean Levy touch to a film in this franchise. And it's actually even better seeing that this will lead the way to other films that will come later. And I think that is quite a visionary approach to what Star Wars is. And I think in a way, Andor being a series which had a heavy, dark, grim tone to it, this film, Star Wars, the Starfighter, will give a different, perhaps I wouldn't say necessarily a polar opposite tone or feel to it, but then it will give it a different tone as well. And being as successful as it is on the small screen, and hopefully this may be quite a success to reinvigorate the major core fandom's hearts or passion back into this particular franchise. But what we know of this particular production that is that it began shooting in August of this year, and it brought in, I mean, they are shooting in places like Italy as well as in the UK. Italy is in Sardinia, and the cast, as usual, has been led by Ryan Gosling, but you also had Flynn Gray, Amy Adams, who play, I think, Flynn Gray's mother in the film. And also villains. The villains for this particular production will be likely Matt Smith, but Mia Goth have been confirmed for this, I mean, for the villainous role, as we already know. So indeed, it is quite exciting to know that we are getting something fresh to perhaps wash away the stale of some of the films that we've not been so happy with. Some to be it film being a subjective, I mean, everybody will have a subjective view of it depending on your experiences or your feelings. So it is indeed quite refreshing to have something quite new, which may perhaps unite all the factions of the Star Wars, fandom. So that is quite interesting to see. But one thing we are sure of is that this particular approach would have a lot of Shawn Levy's um, um, film style or plot or approach being infused into it. And the production is embarking or embracing a lot of practical locations, which is perhaps a little stark difference from the number of the productions of Star Wars that have used a lot of shoots or the volume for studio or the volume for their production. So that is quite refreshing to see. So let me know what you think with regards to this particular standalone story with this all new characters. Is it the right direction that this is being pursued, or you think you would prefer, stories that already have existing characters, or is you think this should be connected to the existing universe directly? Whatever your thoughts may be, kindly leave it in the comment section below. So moving on from Star Wars, we now move to Nollywood, where a young animator has expressed um, his view on the animation industry, particularly in Nigeria. And he has stated that Nigeria as a film industry, I mean, there is a lot of talent already existing in the Nigerian, you know, film landscape. Let me put it that way. But what we lack in particular is actually the the training, the requisite training, and also exposure to make known what that sect of the film industry that exists, that is the animation industry. And then he in particular actually is in the 2D animation, in the sect of the animation industry, and he has made a film. Actually, his name is Gabriel. Let me just confirm I don't want to make him. So Gabriel Ugbodaga, actually a student at the Savannah College of Arts and Design in the United States, and he's produced a very nice animation short, which he showed parts of it were showed when the interview was had on Arise TV, and I think that is quite a revelation. And it is indeed an interesting animation that he did, and he took inspirations from anime. That is something that he is passionate about as well. So that is quite an interesting animation that he did. Very interesting fighting sequences that are very, I would say very new to what we see of a lot of African animations. It's quite gory as well. but the story is actually inspired by a fighting, more like a fighting tournament in some part of Nigeria. So I like the fact that he brought to bear the culture of an existing culture, and the fighting tournament to this particular production. But let's take a quick read at an article that captures some of um, the conversation they had on the interview. So Gabriel Ugbodaga, Nigeria has enough animation talent. What we lack is training and exposure. So Vainglorious director says Nigerian animators are self-taught innovators whose global success proves the country's creative potential. So this actually is the link to the YouTube channel, the YouTube video, which I will leave in the description section for you to watch. So, a Nigerian animator and filmmaker, Gabriel Oshiomati Ugbodaga, writer and director of the acclaimed animated short Vainglorious, has said that the success of a student project demonstrates the untapped potential and global promise of Nigeria's animation industry. Speaking in an interview with Arise News on Thursday, Ugbodaga explained that Vainglorious, which has been screened at various as major festivals in Atlanta, Los Angeles, New York, Long Island, and London, was inspired by Nigeria's traditional combat sport, Dambe, and tells the story of a young boxer, Haruna, and his father's struggles with identity, ambition, and sacrifice. I always knew I was going to make something that had to do with Dambe because I've always been engrossed with action animation. Ubodaga said, finding out that there's a combat sport in my own country with its own popularity, though not as much as I'd like it to be, gave me the push to really tell this story. So yeah, that is indeed quite a filmmaker he is, because he could have just done any other fictional story which perhaps would have fit well within the scope of whatever he wanted to do. But to have this animation that he's done, which actually happens to be a student production, and let it be influenced by a real life culture in Nigeria, is quite amazing. And I'm happy about that because we watch all those anime and all those animations from the east or west of this world, and we see the influences of real life culture in those films. So I like this particular approach as well. And the when it comes to animation in Africa as a whole, it's it's like we've literally not scratched the surface. I mean, we'll say we have scratched the surface, but we've not really done much as compared to the live action animation, or the live action industry rather. So for what he said, yes, there's a lot of talent on the continent. We who may be actually self-taught, or who may actually have been trained in the field of animation itself. But when it comes to the volume of output compared to the live action, or to their live action counterpart, that has not been the case. So indeed, a lot of training is needed, looking at the fact that the technology for animation or even live action has evolved very rapidly, and therefore we all have to learn to catch up with the times. And therefore there's a need for training on a global scale, I mean, on a continental scale, not just for Nigeria, but I would even dare say on a continental scale, to help shore up the interest in animation, which there is, but mostly it's for foreign, animations. But I'm glad that with this particular filmmaker or animator, Gabriel, we would be seeing a lot of perhaps a resurgence into African animation, if there has even been any at all. But I know there are other, talents across the continent who dabble in the animation industry, and are doing much content. But what perhaps is needed the most is a lot of capital injection to help animators like Gabriel be able to do a fully fledged animation movie or series for for the target audience on the continent and even the world over. There are a couple that have been done, which I think one is on Netflix by an East African. Pardon me if I'm not able to bring it up, but indeed to have people be passionate about the animation industry indeed is quite refreshing, and I'm excited about that. And therefore, what he said about training and um, exposure really would perhaps go a long way to even bring investors to this particular aspect of the industry, of the film or the visual industry. So yeah, indeed, you should actually watch Vainglorious. I mean, the little I saw in the interview, it's very interesting. It's intense, and if you like action animation, you should watch Gabriel's animation, which is quite excellent. Currently, I remember he did say something about it being on YouTube, and I would see if I can do a reaction video to it and share it with all of you. So there you have it. That is Gabriel Ugbodaga, pardon me, Oshiomati Ugbodaga, who is talking about animation in Africa. So let me know what you think. How can the global film and animation industry better support talent in emerging markets like Nigeria and Africa? Whatever your thoughts may be, kindly leave it in the comments section below. So now we move on to our very last story, and we most often get excited about what the industry holds for us when we talk about distribution and marketing. And our hope would always be that there would be more cinemas actually being built, there will be more distribution platforms all available, particularly to African talents in the audiovisual industry. And it gets quite sad when that actually is the opposite sometimes, not on all the time, but sometimes. And that seems or happens to be the story of one of South Africa's biggest cinemas, or actually South Africa's biggest cinema chain, and that is Ster-Kinekor, who is facing a number of closures to some of their multiplexes in some major malls in South Africa, and that is quite sad. But on the other turn, it looks like New Metro, which is perhaps the second, biggest cinema chain, if not the first, the second cinema chain in South Africa, scooping up some of those spots to keep the presence of cinemas still afloat. And it is good, neither, but it has its own challenges as well. If perhaps one cinema chain dominates the industry than the other, but currently, as it stands, it looks like that is not the case. Even though Ster-Kinekor is losing quite a number of cinemas due to economic challenges and perhaps reasons that we may not be privy to, it still speaks of the fact that there is more that can be done. But this is the story captured in the broadband on the broadband website, and I'd like us to take a brief read. So, Ster-Kinekor shuts down cinemas in major South African malls. Ster-Kinekor has relinquished several of its prime complex locations around South Africa, with rival New Metro eagerly snapping them up as they become available. Among the major malls where Ster-Kinekor has ceased operations is the Gateway Theatre of Shopping Mall in Durban, its former flagship. New Metro took over the site and reopened it on 3rd October 2025. The cinema chain exited business rescue 2 years ago and announced a wave of retrenchments and theater closures in 2024. Although the company said it was able to keep job losses to a minimum, it has continued shuttering theater locations in recent months. 6 months ago, Ster-Kinekor announced it would close its movie theaters of the Cavendish Square Mall in Claremont, Cape Town in June. In March, Ster-Kinekor closed its cinema complex in Bedford Square, Bedford View. New Metro also took over both of those locations. However, while New Metro is scooping up former Ster-Kinekor locations now, the company has had its fair share of financial difficulties. South Africa's two largest cinema chains have closed roughly a third of their movie theaters in the past decade, according to a previous analysis by My Broadband. So, yeah, it doesn't look good, honestly, but the at least the I mean, to close a third of their cinemas over the past decade shows how challenging of the situation. I mean, that situation is particularly in on a continent where we should be actually putting up more cinemas rather than having them closed. So indeed, it is a big challenge looking at the fact that I mean we actually need more cinemas rather than have the cinemas closed, and that seems to be the challenge the South African film industry is facing. I wouldn't even say just the South African film industry, but actually the African film industry, because we do not have much cinemas on the continent, and we are still in that crossroad where it doesn't look like African, films from other African countries can showcase or are being shown heavily in other African countries as well. So, but to have a cinema close on the continent is really not the best. And I know there are several reasons perhaps why this cinema is closing. Mainly, I think would be economic for economic reasons, though I must say. But I think aside the challenge of the economic reasons, maybe one of the best solution for this would be to have a properly networked film industry across the continent. And I say this because if there are movies from Hollywood, I mean, when you watch the film, when you read the entire article, it does state that Hollywood perhaps might have been a contributory factor to it as well, seeing that a number of the films coming up perhaps in a particular year or two wasn't really well received by audiences and it led to poor ticket sales. So that could be a reason. But I think one of the major reason could also be that maybe the sourcing of films from Hollywood alone may not be enough to shore up the revenue to keep them afloat. So I always think, or I believe strongly that a properly networked film community across the continent would help, because where perhaps a Hollywood film may not be able to deliver the goods, an African film can, because we can perhaps relate to those stories and maybe more entertaining to some section of demographics that attends or the audience, compared to perhaps even the foreign films that we think would always win the day. So a properly networked film industry across the continent may be able to help, with this in terms of distribution of films from one African country to the other. So those are things that I think we need to perhaps pay attention to. It may not solve the entire problem, because I think the key problem for perhaps the closures of some of these cinemas has to do with economic reasons. That's which for for that we cannot do much about, except if the GDP of those countries and the economic hardships are alleviated. So these are challenges that is quite a problem to navigate for the industry if it finds itself in an economy that may not be performing well. So those are things that perhaps may need a bigger dialogue even, or maybe a dialogue which is even bigger than the film industry itself. It has to do with the entire nation and the entire continent. Yeah, so it is indeed a challenging, and it's sad that the cinemas of Ster-Kinekor have to be relinquished for that purpose. Even though New Metro is, snapping their cinemas and keeping them, the presence of cinemas in some of these malls, I would have rather preferred that both, Ster-Kinekor would keep its cinemas and New Metro could add more to in different locations as well. More cinemas are needed, whether in South Africa or or across the continent, they are still needed. So yeah, it is a challenge, but I'm glad at least New Metro is snapping some of them. But my hope is Ster-Kinekor would keep on, things will get better for both cinemas, and they'll keep on adding more cinemas rather than losing the cinemas. So I'll leave the article in the comment section below. But before we leave, briefly, let me show on screen how much how many cinemas they've lost over the years. So if you take a look at this data from 2015 to 2025, Ster-Kinekor at the time had 55 cinemas, but in 2015, but in 2025, it's now down to 34. If you take a look at New Metro as well, they had 21 cinemas, and usually these are multiplexes. Those are locations, multiplexes. But then at in 2025, they have 17. So now the total cinemas available is around 51, meaning, and they've lost more than a fourth of the, like a third, collectively a third of the cinemas in South Africa, and that is quite sad. That is quite sad. So yeah, there we have it. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing movie cinemas or theaters on the continent, or what do you think we can likely be done to go a long way to help the cinema? Whatever your thoughts may be, can you leave it in the comment section below? So yeah, all too soon we've come to an end of the episode of the Film Mandate. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for joining me for this episode. I'll be coming your way again with another interesting, episode or stories for tomorrow's episode as well. My name is Papa Otu, and this has been the Film Mandate. I'll see you soon.